All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday afternoon. We're gonna just take 1 minute to let everyone arrive in, make sure that we don't start too early for people. So we'll start in about a minute. Okay, great. Looks like we're about ready to go. So once again, thank you everyone for coming. My name is Joe Casey, and I'm a manager here at Great Lakes Cruises. We're so happy to have you join us today, where we'll be introducing various destinations, ships, and itineraries focused on the Great Lakes region, but more specifically on the Canadian Maritimes and the St. Lawrence Seaway. I'm from just south of the area we'll be discussing. I'm from New England, from Boston, Massachusetts. And something that I really love about this job is that in about a month's time, towards the end of this cruise season, a lot of the itineraries and the cruise lines have trips that end down here in New England towards Portland, Maine, or even down in Boston. And I have the opportunity to, when they are in port up in Boston, visit some of these ships, spend some time in the afternoon with the crew, and be on the ship once again. So only a few weeks from now, at the end of October, if any of our guests here today do happen to be on one of those trips ending in Boston, if you see me out on the streets, if I pass you as you disembark and I embark, please come say hello. And let's say hello to my co-host alongside me, Stephen Burnett. Stephen is the executive director of the Great Lakes Cruise Association, and he's a good friend of ours that lends his deep expertise on cruising in the Great Lakes to us this afternoon. Stephen and I, we share a common bond over some classic rock groovy tunes. And I actually don't think I mentioned this to you, Stephen, the other day, but this past weekend I had a long car ride and spent some time listening to some deeper cuts of Fleetwood Mac. And let me tell you, there are some older songs in those albums that I haven't explored, and I was surprised at the range of some of the style hidden in there. So we can discuss that later on, but I'll hand it off to you now to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, that's good to hear. Thank you so much, Joe, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm actually sitting in the Great Lakes at the moment. Well, not exactly in the Great Lakes. I live in Kingston, which is on the St. Lawrence River, where it joins Lake Ontario. And we had the Pearl Mist in harbour this morning, which was quite a thrill. What Joe didn't mention is a very competitive. He's a Boston Bruins fan, and I'm a Toronto Maple Leaf fan. And we better leave that topic aside because it could get rather heated. However, I'm thrilled to be here. Our colleague Susan James is also on screen. Susan lives not too far from me, and good that we get the team together like this. A big welcome from me. I have the great honor of representing about 30 odd ports in the Great Lakes. We are a wonderful coalition of ports and communities, and our role is to try and expand the great story about Great Lakes cruising. And so I'm happy to talk with my friends at greatlakescruising.com and chat with you on screen, hopefully in your living rooms, about my experiences in the Great Lakes. So I'll hand it back to Joe and pop back in a couple of minutes and start talking about the Maritimes, the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and the Great Lakes itself.
Lovely. Thank you, Stephen. So moving on, we want to start this webinar with a poll on your cruise level experience, just to see where people are at today, where our guests are coming from with their experience. So that poll should have just popped up across your screen. If you want to go ahead and let us know your cruise experience. And as we see these responses rolling in, I will end the poll in a second as we have few more people that we're waiting on. Looks like there's a fair number of experienced cruisers at 5+ cruises, and but we still do have some beginners who we welcome definitely to a first cruise experience. The Great Lakes is a great place to start, and we'll explain why in a minute. So I think I can share the results of this just so you all see for a second. This should be popped up across your screen. So yeah, we have a few guests with us today who this will be their first cruise, which is very exciting. And but an increased amount who have been on a bunch of cruises. So we have a few resident experts with us here today, and Susan and Stephen. But for sure, you all have your own experiences and expertise that you can layer in. And so something I want to mention is that we have the Q&A enabled, and we encourage you guys to throw questions in the Q&A box, which you can access pretty easily on your laptop. But if you're on your phone, you might want to just tap the screen, and then the Q&A button should show up at the bottom. So feel free to throw questions in there that we most likely will save for the end. But it's easiest for you to just ask them as they come along. And as well, the chat is also open and enabled if you are having any difficulties or want to put anything in the chat to us. That'd be great. Awesome. So I will just go back to our slides and we'll click through and continue. So just to start, I wanted to demonstrate here the difference between a typical mega ship that cruises on the open seas, as you see towards the bottom of the slide, and contrast it with the smaller ships that you see towards the top. So those large and mega ships, you can tell how enormous they are right there on that on your screen. They typically carry anywhere from 2,500 to 4,000 passengers. And you know, these behemoths can spend days out on the open water. Therefore, they come equipped with all sorts of, you know, amenities and entertainment on board beyond what a typical smaller ship offers. So on the Great Lakes, though, these small ships, the smaller ships at the top are the only ones able to really traverse and navigate through the waters and through the locks. So those smaller ships and the ones that we'll be discussing today hold a more reasonable amount of guests, between typically 120 and 300, 400 guests. They spend far less time out on the water and more time in port. And it lends to an entire Great Lakes cruise experience that's far more intimate, where you get to know the crew, you get to know the destinations, you get to know the other guests with just a higher level of personal experience. Another reason that these ships have to be much smaller is, like I mentioned earlier, to navigate through the locks. And that might be something that Stephen mentions a bit later on, but these ships are restricted to not having lifeboats hang off the sides, as when you're in the locks, there are steep walls that the ship needs to fit between, and usually it's very tight navigation. So as you can see on this next slide, a few photos of these ships on the Great Lakes, and there are a variety of different cruise lines to choose from. We want to work with you to figure out between all the various cruise lines that offer itineraries on the Great Lakes, which at this point is probably 7, 8, or maybe even 9. I think Stephen or Susan can correct me on that number. We want to work with you to figure out between all these different options, what cruise line is the best, what itinerary is the best and suits your preferences most. And so whether it's, you know, dates and prices, but more likely it could be the feel of the cabins or the shore excursions, the cuisine, or even the enrichment programs that they offer. Those are going to be the deciding factors. And as, you know, personal independent advisors, we aren't beholden to one cruise line. We pride ourselves on giving you the best advice that we can, based on our experience and expertise with these cruise lines and with these ships. And we work with those cruise lines to make sure that we know about the newest and ongoing promotions, so that we can offer you the best price that's available to you based on the different cabins and experiences. So we're able to be reached very quickly by phone or by email. You'll always be speaking to one of us, usually either Susan or I, a real person. And this is in comparison to the cruise lines, who tend to be just more difficult to interact with and engage with, more slow, painful with communications, and they're tending to be dealing with hundreds of passengers, where we're able to offer you that personalized experience. So later on, I'll introduce Susan, who I just mentioned, who's our travel expert. Many of you are probably already familiar with her. We will give her time to have her own introduction a bit later on, and engage her for the Q&A at the end. So yeah, without further ado, I'd like to give the floor back to you, Stephen, to lead us on today's excursion to the Canadian Maritimes and the St. Lawrence Seaway.
Thank you so much, Joe. That was a great introduction, and I'd be happy to share some of my experiences here. In fact, I was traveling in the Maritimes with my good friend Paul Hayes, who has narrated some of our videos, and we'll share with some of those with you in a short while. So let's take a look at one of the maps that we're using to orientate where we are. Joe's kindly put a yellow box around the area we're going to focus on, and that will be a cruise that will leave, for example, the Canadian Maritimes, Nova Scotia, and travel from Halifax across to Prince Edward Island, where the capital is Charlottetown, a little further north, and turn the corner left into the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and then cruise all the way through Quebec along to Ontario and the Great Lakes. And I think we have another map that's a little more concentrated here. The idea is to be able to cruise through the St. Lawrence Seaway, and take a look at some rather unique areas. Before we do that, if I could just get you to glance at Prince Edward Island, go north to Anticosti Island. Just to the left of that, it's not on the map, is the Magdalen Islands, where my wife and I holiday every other year. And few ships get to stop at the Magdalens, but some of ours do, and they are totally unique islands in the middle of the North Atlantic, just at the entrance to the Gulf of St. Lawrence. So we're now turning the corner. We're into the Gulf of St. Lawrence. We're cruising past Rimouski, down to Quebec City. We've just passed the Saguenay Fjord. You can see the Saguenay on your map just below Baie-Comeau. This is a fjord that goes a long distance into the hinterland. And where it meets the St. Lawrence River, there is a resident pod of 600 whales, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, but about 600 whales live in that region. They don't migrate anywhere. And so the whale watching in that particular area is second to none in the world. Go a little bit more further west, and we're in Quebec City, and then into Montreal, and eventually into the Great Lakes proper. So having sort of navigated with me now along the St. Lawrence Seaway, let's go back and take a look at Prince Edward Island and see what Charlottetown looks like. So my time in PEI, in fact, I should say my times in PEI are frequent, because to go to the Magdalen Islands, we drive all the way from Ontario, where we live, through Quebec, Nova Scotia, onto Prince Edward Island to the far end, where we take the ferry to the Magdalen Islands. But we spend some time in Charlottetown because it's utterly charming. This looks like a bit of a metropolis, but in fact, you can walk from the ship where it docks in about 7 minutes flat to the middle of town. So it's actually a rather tiny, compact little community, but it's very, very pretty, and it's very historic because it is, in some respects, the birthplace of Canada, where the conference took place. So if we move on from here, I'm going to enlist my good friend Paul Hayes to help out. Paul and I did some family video creation on Prince Edward Island. I got Paul to narrate it, so I'll just back off for a minute and let Paul show you some of his videos of Prince Edward Island. Can you put that on the screen, Joe?
Charlottetown is the capital city of Prince Edward Island, Canada's smallest province. The island was long inhabited by the indigenous Mi'kmaq peoples, who named it Evaguit, or cradled on the waves. Europeans began visiting PEI in the early 16th century, with occupation fluctuating between the British and French. In 1775, privateers from Massachusetts duly pillaged the island. Following the American Revolutionary War, an effort was made to attract Loyalist refugees to the area. By 1769, the British colony was given its current name. Charlottetown was the location where the 1864 Canadian Confederation Conference took place. PEI was not entirely agreeable to the terms and elected to remain a British settlement for some time afterwards. There are several reasons to tie up in Charlottetown, but perhaps geography is the strongest. With its proximity to Canada's other maritime provinces and the New England states, the location figures prominently with itinerary planners. The establishment of the Canada New England Cruise Product brand confirms PEI an obvious destination of choice. The port of Charlottetown is on the south shore of the island. The cruise ship terminal is a few minutes stroll from the center of town. It is alive with a pop-up marketplace of boutiques and souvenir stores, offering a broad selection of items handmade in PEI. Tourism PEI is always present, offering maps and advice to the visitors. Touring anywhere in PEI is like immersing oneself in a picture postcard. The landscape seems as though it has been curated, especially for photographers. Most of the island is heavily farmed. The rich 19,000 hectares of arable land yield superb crops, including several varieties of PEI's world-famous potatoes. The red soil and curious red dirt roads are unique to this terrain. Paired with a deep blue sky, emerald green grass, and rows of purple lupins, the Technicolor countryside leaves an indelible impression. The color palette continues the length of Prince Edward Island National Park along the Gulf of St. Lawrence. A modestly sized island, PEI is easily experienced by car. A non-stop drive of 225 kilometers from tip to tip takes roughly 3 hours, plenty of time to visit most of the must-see attractions.
Well, thanks for that, Joe. I appreciate it. It was a bit nostalgic for me. It's curious. I have a good friend in PEI who is constantly telling me to stop calling the place PEI and call it Prince Edward Island. And I've got to admit, in a way, they have a good point, because PEI is a little bit impersonal, whereas Prince Edward Island sounds a little more romantic, I'd say. So let's leave PEI for the moment, if we can. And I should call it Prince Edward Island, and move onward to the Gulf of St. Lawrence, because we're going to really start traveling in the province of Quebec. And if we talk about Quebec, perhaps the icon of this magnificent Canadian French-speaking province is Quebec City, where my wife comes from, I have to say. And what we're looking at here is the Chateau Frontenac, the magnificent hotel that dominates the entire city. It's not quite apparent from this slide, but the chateau is perched on top of a hill, and there's a long terrace in front of the chateau, and then you can see the little bit of a forest beneath it. And at the very bottom of the slide to the left, you can see the lower town. So Quebec has an upper town where the chateau is, and a lower town with lots of boutiques and stores and wonderful places to get a coffee and a croissant. And there's a little funicular that takes you between Quebec upper town and lower town. The province is very special, I have to say. It's a French-speaking province, and although not all Canadians speak French, I have the privilege of being married into a French-speaking family, and so I have been able to learn French, and I spend quite a bit of time practicing my French when I'm in the province. So let's take a look at one of the videos that we made with Paul Hayes when we were visiting the province of Quebec now. It's a short perspective, but a little bit different to Prince Edward Island, I think.
The St. Lawrence River port of Quebec City dates to 1608. The capital city of its namesake province has an urban population of around 500,000. The city's history features prominently in the establishment of Canada. Originally a flourishing Algonquin First Nations settlement, Quebec City is the oldest European colonized region in the country. French explorers traversed the North Atlantic with family, livestock, and clergy in tow. Jacques Cartier first visited the area in 1535, and by 1608, Samuel de Champlain had begun the construction of a fort. Colonial forces competed for dominance of this strategic location as cannon fire from across the river arced into the old town. Much of the city was destroyed during the Battle of the Plains of Abraham in 1759. In 1985, the historic district of Old Quebec was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the only North American city to have preserved its walls and ramparts. Today, the city is a cultural masterpiece of architecture, museums, fine dining, and shopping. Cruise ships sail up the narrowing upper reaches of the St. Lawrence River past Ile d'Orléans to get their first glimpse of the city, with the Citadel and Chateau Frontenac dominating the skyline. The Port of Quebec City is a major international trade hub, handling over 28 million tons of freight annually. The port welcomes more than 236,000 cruise guests each year. Quebec City is an ideal turn port for cruise ships. Because of its high profile as a destination and the quality of its tourism assets, many guests elect to stay several days in Quebec City before or after their cruise. The city offers several well-known hotel brands. The world-famous Chateau Frontenac is perched high atop a cliff overlooking the St. Lawrence River. It opened in 1893 as part of the Canadian Pacific chain of chateau-style hotels, linking rail service across the country. During World War II, it was the site of two important Allied strategic conferences attended by Winston Churchill, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and Mackenzie King. Following the success of the D-Day landings in 1944, the same group of world leaders again met here to discuss how best to move forward in the post-war years. Movie stars and royalty were also drawn to this iconic hotel. The likes of Alfred Hitchcock, Anne Baxter, Princess Grace of Monaco, and Charles Lindbergh have stayed here. Well,
that's just a quick glimpse of Quebec City, thanks to my good friend Paul Hayes and the videos that we made while our families were there. I was thinking, Joe, I should share with guests that it's extraordinary how much shared history the United States and Canada has, and we tend to forget about that. We think of ourselves as totally separate countries, but if you reflect on the amount of New England incursions into Prince Edward Island and the amount of toing and froing of the border between Quebec and New York State and Canada generally with the War of 1812, there's a lot of shared history in this part of the world. Reflecting back to the chateau, just a very personal note here, my father-in-law and one of my brother-in-laws and my wife all worked at the chateau when they were young people, students, and putting themselves through university. So we have a lot of family history that resides in this beautiful city. So let's move onward from Quebec and take a look at some of the other components of this interesting webinar. If you can move me
the
to
St. Lawrence River. The St. Lawrence River port of Quebec City dates to 1608, the capital city of its name.
We just
There we
need
go.
to the next slide if we can. And we're looking at a remarkable ship. This is the Hanseatic Inspiration. If you could just go back one slide, and so we could take a look at that ship again. Hapag-Lloyd is one of the oldest shipping companies in the world. Let's not call it a cruise company, because they are a true world global shipping company. And they now have a magnificent fleet of cruise ships, and several of them are what we call ice class. And the Hanseatic Inspiration is a true ice class expedition ship with a hull that is allowed to go into thick pack ice in the Arctic and the Antarctic. And it also travels through the Great Lakes, which is wonderful for us because we get to see this ship. It is beautifully built. It's a very special kind of a design of a ship, not too tall, extremely stable, and built with just the finest components that they could possibly come up with. It's just a masterpiece of marine engineering, I have to say. And I'm a ship enthusiast, so you'll forgive me if I talk a little bit long about this marvelous organization. Take me to the next slide, Joe. I'd like to just very briefly take our guests through this itinerary. And now you've traveled with me through from Halifax in the Maritimes, the Ile de la Madeleine we talked about, Prince Edward Island, of course, into the Gulf of St. Lawrence, travel to Quebec City. But now if you take a look at the itinerary of the inspiration, she's traveling way past Quebec City into Montreal, the great cosmopolitan city of Quebec, through the St. Lawrence Seaway, past where I live in Kingston, into Lake Ontario, Toronto, up into Lake Erie, Lake Huron, of course, into the All-American Lake of Lake Michigan, ending the cruise in Milwaukee. So it is a very special cruise and a totally comprehensive look at the Great Lakes. And what I should say, and I really did forget to say, is that Hapag-Lloyd operate their ships as bilingual ships. So it is it is a German and English experience. The announcements, the staff all speak fluent English. A lot of the material is in English, so you needn't be worried about the fact that you're traveling purely on a German-speaking ship. But it is a magnificent itinerary, and the cruise line really operates at the very highest level, and they understand the demanding nature of their frequent guests. They have a very high repeat quotient of the guests that travel with them. So let's take another look at some of the destinations. Hapag-Lloyd and our other ships will be visiting, going through the Great Lakes, through the lock system, arriving at Mackinac Island. And on the left, you can see the main street of Mackinac Island. You can't see any cars. That's because there are only two cars on the island. One is owned by a friend of mine who's the police chief, and the other one is owned by his best friend, who is the fire chief. The only other way you can get around Mackinac Island is either on foot or by renting a bicycle or a tricycle, or in fact a horse-drawn carriage. And there are, I think it's something like 130 horse-drawn carriages available across the island for rent and for charter. So it's a very special part of the United States, and overseas visitors are utterly charmed by the Victorian architecture. On the right-hand side of the screen, we have an angle shot of Detroit, and you can see this magnificent people mover. It's on cement pilings, stilts, if you like, and it's an above ground train that takes people from one end of the city to the other, excuse me, and provides also not only a way of commuting around Detroit, but a bird's eye view of some of the attractions. And if you look at the lower part of the right-hand side of the screen, this is a very unique view of the rock formations in Georgian Bay in the 30,000 islands. This is a unique part of Lake Huron on the Canadian side, where they have, well, I haven't counted them, but I've flown over them and traveled through them many times, and it looks as though there just could be 30,000 islands there somehow. So let's move to the next slide and see a little more about this magnificent ship. Hapag-Lloyd are very big on renovations and interior design, and they have a really special European flair in the way they bring the light from the outside into their ship. They use transparent ceiling coverings, and they flood light in through these large picture windows. A lot of their fabrics are light colored. Even in the guest rooms, you'll see in the cabins and the staterooms, they followed this same theme. So you can be sure that when you're traveling on this ship, you're traveling along with a really interesting design ethic. Same with their cuisine. It's a German ship, and so you're going to get a European flavor when it comes to items on the menu, most of which as North Americans absolutely enjoy. And there'll be some specialities that I think will be quite surprising and interesting on a journey of this nature. So traveling along with Hapag-Lloyd, they take a slightly different approach to their onboard experiences, and I think they use the word enrichment. Not only do they have lecturers like my good friend Howard Schuster, who delivers interesting lectures which highlight the differences between Canada and the US political systems, our health systems, our educational approach, wonderful insights into how the countries differ, but also they have accomplished lecturers on board who have different specialties, such as archaeologists, and here we have ornithologists, and in this case, an oceanographer who is explaining some of the experiments that they do whilst they're traveling, looking through microscopes at the microplanktons. So there's a remarkable amount of interest going on board this ship, as I have to say we have on our other cruise ships, but Hapag-Lloyd are particularly big on their enrichment program. We talked about the interior decoration of the Hanseatic Inspiration. You can see the approach they take with these wonderful light fabrics and the way in which they use their wall treatments. Their whole philosophy is basically to try and bring the outside light into this relatively small environment of a stateroom or a suite, and it seems to succeed. I've traveled in one of these, and I know them quite well, and I think it's just a marvelous way to decorate their ship. Traveling further along, one of the things that you need to be aware of traveling on any of our cruise ships, and absolutely on Hapag-Lloyd, is the relationship which they have with the natural world. And that is done in a number of ways. Some varied and interesting shore excursions they've planned for each port which they will visit. And then the whole topic of wellness on board the Inspiration is really important, with not only an ocean view sauna and a spa, but the ability to buy into massage facilities, to make a reservation with a masseur or a wellness coach. It's kind of a different way of offering a service on a cruise ship, and it seems to be extremely popular, and I particularly enjoyed, I have to say. So we're traveling still on the Inspiration, but we've now switched to another unique ship. This is an interesting vessel that was built in Canada for Pearl Seas Cruises. They're based, the American company based in New England, not too far from where Joe lives. And we're seeing the Pearl Mist come out of the inlet in Muskegon. Muskegon in Michigan has a particularly wide inlet, and it's been well known for mariners that if there's any rough water on the lake, it's very easy to cruise into the inlet and shelter within the inner harbor of Muskegon. So here we have Pearl Seas leaving Muskegon with the harbor light in the foreground as they navigate out of the inlet. Pearl Mist, an interesting ship. As I said, it was built in Canada, and they have many outdoor suites with balconies. And it's particularly interesting if you're not one of those people that want to rush off the ship all the time. My wife and I cruise a lot, and we love to have a balcony because we generally have breakfast every morning in the open air. Sometimes we have to put a fleece on, granted, but it's really nice to be able to have a balcony, and Pearl Seas Cruises designed that into Pearl Mist when she was originally conceived in the Canadian shipyard. So moving along, the itinerary that Pearl Mist is doing is quite interesting because it includes all 5 Great Lakes. Not only do they come down the Seaway, through Lake Ontario, of course, Lake Erie, up into Huron. I should just digress and say to the east of Lake Huron, there's an area you can see called Georgian Bay. There was a movement in Canada to try and have that named as the 6th Great Lake. Now, it went a fair distance, but you know, there was some resistance, and we still do have 5 Great Lakes. But if you're ever in your Lake Huron and you look around and you see how vast it is, in many respects, it qualifies as another Great Lake. So traveling from Georgian Bay north to Sault Ste. Marie, Pearl Mist generally goes through the lock system and dips a toe into Lake Superior, not very far at this point, and then they come back through the locks, through the Mackinac Straits, into Mackinac Island for a short visit, and then down Lake Michigan into Muskegon and across to Milwaukee, where their cruise ends. They have a particularly good enrichment program, and I know Pearl Seas Cruises have been working hard on their shore excursions. If we can migrate to the next slide, I think we'll get some idea of what this looks like. To the left on the slide, you can see one of the steep but very well built walkways down to the waterfront just south of Muskegon. On the right-hand side in the upper corner, you can have a peek at the 30,000 islands, and maybe you can see, maybe it's a little bit distant, but many of these islands have tiny homes and cottages, and that's because with their close proximity to Toronto, which is a huge metropolis, people have summer homes on the 30,000 islands. So apart from Pearl Sea Cruises and Hapag-Lloyd and our other cruise lines navigating up here, often you're cruising past an island with someone's home, and it's not uncommon to see the kids rushing out and waving or even firing off a couple of fireworks to catch your attention. So the 30,000 islands, and down below the slide, of course, is Detroit, looking across the river from Windsor at this marvelous metropolis, I should say. So going back to Pearl Mist, I just want to emphasize that they have a strong focus on cuisine. I had lunch on board this beautiful ship a few weeks ago and had just a marvelous experience. They make a specific effort to create space in their dining room, so you're not crowded, you're not sitting right next to someone else, you have tables well spaced. Pearl Sea Cruises are very concerned about their client experience and have spent a lot of time studying how to deliver a comfortable and yet meaningful dining experience. It's the same, I think, in their public rooms. If we can go to the next slide. Well, I'm one ahead of myself here. We were talking about the enrichment program. I'll come back to the public rooms in a minute. What we're looking at in the right-hand slide is really a clip just behind the two horses traveling in a carriage on Main Street and Mackinac Island. In the distance, you can just see the famous Grand Hotel, the largest wood structure in North America. And then on the left-hand part of the slide, here's somebody in a kayak taking a photograph of the aft end of Pearl Seas Cruises. And if you look carefully, you can see hanging from the back is their large tender. So if they don't have a dock to tie up to, they just lower the tender and take people ashore, as they did this morning in Kingston, where I live. So I think the next slide should talk about staterooms and suites. And very much like Hapag-Lloyd, the interior designers at Pearl Sea Cruises are fond of their light fabrics. And I think this is a wonderful trend. I've been traveling on cruise ships for a long time now, and not every cruise ship has caught on to this light fabric and light wall covering trick. And it makes a lot of sense if you think about flooding the outside in through a large picture window and then spending time in a room that looks as beautiful as that. So I give them a lot of credit for the way in which they have renovated and then redesigned the interior of their staterooms and their suites. But we thought we were going to take a look at some of the interior shots, and we have. And this is one of the lounges. In fact, it's the main lounge on Pearl Mist. One of the things that I really like is if you can look at the windows to the left of the slide, you can see they slope slightly inward. And usually Pearl Mist place a pair of binoculars on each window, just below each window. And many times the guests are wandering up, grabbing the binoculars and focusing on the shoreline or one of those large 1,000-foot freighters as they slide by. If you think about your cruise ship's about 390 feet long, and when you slide by a 1,000-foot freighter going in the other direction, it really is quite breathtaking, and even more so if you have a pair of binoculars to use. So I think we have another image here of guests on board Pearl Mist, and you can see the windows. I can't see any binoculars there, but generally when you're traveling, the crew put them out so that you can use them. So we're traveling on now into the Great Lakes, and I'm going to hand it back to Joe, who can tell you a little more about some of the other cruise lines that Great Lakes Cruises sells and presents for your interest. So thanks for listening, and I'll stick around. If there are any questions, I would certainly try and answer them.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephen. That was impressive and well done, with jumping from talking about the destinations to the itineraries and the different ships. So we appreciate all your expertise and everything you're able to offer to us. One thing I wanted to just flash up here is just the various cruise lines, like I mentioned earlier, that we operate. that we operate with and work with. So there's 9 cruise lines there, and each of them have, a select variety of itineraries. Some that, like we saw today, go through all 5 Great Lakes and into the St. Lawrence Seaway. Some other itineraries focus just on Lake Michigan and Lake Superior and do a deep dive with some really well done excursions in a smaller area of the Great Lakes. And others at the end of the season present itineraries that travel along the fall foliage in New England and what would that be? Southeast Canada, the Canadian Maritimes, as we saw today. So there's a lot of different options that can be difficult to work through and understand. That's all presented to you. And that's the service we want to offer you. And our expertise is helping you navigate through what are the best itineraries, cruise lines, and experience for you to have. And so, yeah, with that, I want to introduce Susan James. She's our travel specialist. Again, many of you must have already spoken with her, and she's helped a lot of our guests book trips this year on the Great Lakes. Susan, if you want to give a brief overview of your varied background and expertise, that would be phenomenal. Ooh, here, let me take you off mute. Okay. You should be able to come on now.
Okay,
There we go.
you can hear me?
Great.
Okay, all right, we'll try this again. Yes, I have been, excuse me, a travel agent for over 30 years. So that has given me obviously a lot of knowledge. So if you have any questions about, documentation, anything like that, I can always assist you with that. But my main goal is to get everybody onto the right Great Lakes cruise itinerary for them. So when you speak with me, I'll probably have a lot of questions for you, but it's all good because I just need to learn what you're looking for, what you're all about, and then I can pick an itinerary and a ship for you that would work best. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, so like we mentioned earlier, take advantage of her as a resource and her years of expertise in the Great Lakes. She's happy to talk through the pros and cons of all the different choices. And you have her direct line phone number right there on screen to reach out to, and her email as well. She'll be following up regardless with you just to understand your preferences and what you're looking to book probably at this point next cruise season 2025. But proactively reach out to her and she'll be ready to answer. Again, that's one of the features that we want to pride ourselves on and we like to offer to our guests. So at this point, we will open up to the Q&A. Again, the Q&A button should be at the bottom of your mobile device if you're on your phone, if you tap the screen, or as well on your laptop. So if you would like to come in and ask Stephen any questions, Susan as well will jump in and give her expertise and her answers. I think actually the first one we have popping across my screen, Stephen, this one probably makes sense for you since you've worked a bit on the excursions and the shore excursions. I guess, can you talk about the difference in like a Great Lakes shore excursion, with a larger cruise line excursion? I think something you mentioned earlier to me that I remember is the disembarkation time, how that difference is, and then how that gives you more time on shore.
I can do that. I can do
you can
that.
speak about that.
I've spent quite a bit of time helping to design shore excursions throughout the entire Great Lakes. And so any cruise line that you're traveling on will have an incredibly rich series of shore excursions for you to take. Some of them are included, a couple of them have them as supplements, but generally all of them will have a tremendous selection of what's best to see and what's easy to see. The other thing I would say is that in many Great Lakes ports, if you just want to stay close to the port, you can wander off the ship on your own and grab an ice cream or a cup of coffee locally and, relax and say hello to some of the locals. Everybody's happy to speak. But the point I think Joe was making is that the difference between some of these large ships in the ocean cruising fleet and the small ships in the Great Lakes when you're on shore excursions is that on ocean ships, I've waited upwards of 45 minutes to get off a ship once they're mustering the shore excursion call. Whereas in the Great Lakes, I think we've got it down to an average of 9 minutes and no more. I've been timing this for the last few years, and I've been watching cruise lines as they pull up at different ports in the Great Lakes and speaking to my friends. So one of the joys of traveling on a small, intimate cruise ship is that you arrive at a port, and as soon as they're ready to disembark, you're probably all off the ship in about 9 minutes. And I think that's a great bonus.
Awesome. Great points. That's really good to know. We have another question here from Kathleen regarding the wheelchair accessibility on the ships, and not only on the ships with like a roll-in shower and the staterooms, but also how that translates to onshore excursions, and if these cruise lines make a good effort to accommodate onshore excursions for handicap guests. And I think Stephen or Susan, both of you can jump in and as you like.
Let me invite Susan to talk about the cruise line experience on board, and then I'll chat about shore excursions. Do you want to comment, Susan?
Yes, some of the ships do offer handicap facilities. At the time of booking, or when we first start talking about it, I would ask questions like just how much assistance is needed. You know, if it has to be a cabin that does allow for a wheelchair, or is it going to be a walker? Because they are different situations. So everything is handled separately. But overall, yes, you can get handicap facilities, handicapped accessible cabins. Yeah.
What I've found working with the cruise lines, I work with the cruise lines directly on the development side of their business, and every single cruise line that I have spoken with has a great enthusiasm for hosting people that have physical challenges, be it a walker or a simple walking stick, or in fact on a wheelchair. And when we're dealing with European cruise lines like Burnett Cruises and Hapag-Lloyd and Plan Tours, they have European legislation which compels them to make sure that the navigation on board is possible by wheelchair clients. So that means that there are no barriers, or there are no great big steps in the passageways to navigate through. So more and more the cruise lines are catering to those that have physical challenges. Now, when it comes to shore excursions, it's exactly the same. Be it United States sector of the Great Lakes or the Canadian sector, every single port and city is tuned into helping those who have physical challenges navigate their shore excursions, help to get on the buses, be able to store the walkers and the wheelchairs in the luggage compartment of the buses while they're helped onto the front seat of the motor coach. And there's a great enthusiasm for helping people that have physical challenges. It's not 100% perfect. It never will be. But I think we're doing a great job generally in recognizing this challenge and rising to it.
Thank you, Stephen and Susan. That's a helpful commentary for sure. We have a few more questions that have come in, and some of them might be like quicker answers, and others might require a little bit more time. But to start, is there a cruise in the Great Lakes that mostly covers Michigan? Susan, you might know the itinerary.
Just one lake? No. There are usually at least 2 lakes involved in any of the cruises.
Okay, awesome. And then starting and ending in Detroit, is there a round trip Detroit itinerary? That sounds tougher.
That's an interesting question. The answer is there is no round trip in the Great Lakes. And the reason is that there are 19th century laws, believe it or not, that do not allow cruise ships to start and end in the same port. These are called, in the United States, it's the Jones Act or the Passenger Services Act.
Good old Jones Act.
It's the Coasting Trade Act, and we struggle with this. So we love to be able to start a cruise in Detroit and finish in Detroit, or Toronto and finish in Detroit, but every cruise that we have is a one-way cruise. And what's amusing is that I have several European friends who decided that they would defeat this And what they did is they booked a cruise from Quebec City to Detroit, and they waited on holiday for about 5 days on Mackinac Island. They drove up, and they went back to Detroit, and they booked a cruise back to Quebec City. And I think booking them separately is perfectly legal, but I thought it was a wonderful way to beat the bureaucracy, and I hope that doesn't sound too bad.
Interesting. I vaguely remember an itinerary that sounds like it embarks out of Chicago and then arrives and ends in Milwaukee. And I think that's one that travels just through Lake Michigan and Superior. So that's a similar, almost kind of roundabout way to still make it work.
Those of you who work on the planning side of Great Lakes cruising, and I've done this for the last 23 years, struggle with those issues. And it's largely old government laws and acts that are to some extent out of date, but it's fun. It makes our life interesting.
Yeah. There's a question here about airfare and if we handle airfare. In my experience, we don't, but Susan, is there an exception there?
We don't handle airfare, but some of the cruise lines do. For example, Viking quite often will offer airfare from major gateways, and even Pearl Seas has stepped up. And as the booking season goes on, they do start offering air on some of their itineraries. They're playing it by ear right now.
Okay, awesome. Great. So yeah, speaking with Susan, she'll make sure whether they can get you airfare or not on different itineraries. And then another question or two on payment and reservations. So I guess the difference in costs typically for a 7-day, 7-night cruise versus a like 10-night cruise. Susan, I guess how much more expensive is the 10-night rather than the 7-night on average?
Well, if we're talking about Pearl Seas, comparing the 7-night to the 11-night, the 7-night starts at around 6,600. The 11-night starts at around 9,200.
Okay. Yeah, so that's a good range. That's probably typical and indicative of the other cruise lines as well. I know that Victory has their promotion going on through the end of either October or November that might keep their prices down for a bit, but that range sounds like it's pretty accurate across cruise lines. And then the breakdown for the typical like deposit and reservation fee, and then the payment plan for when full payment is due. How does that usually work?
Every cruise line is different with the amount that they require for deposit, but generally you do have to pay the deposit in order to get your cabin secured. And then your final balance can be due. Well, if it's Viking, it can be almost up to a year in advance. If it's Victory, that's 6 months in advance. Pearl and Ponant are 90 days in advance.
Awesome. I love it. That's really putting Susan on the spot on the top of her head by different cruise lines. One's the full payment, but that's a great way to demonstrate how, you can look at all the different itineraries and destinations, but there's those like important level details that you won't know unless you talk. Like it'd be very difficult to find that all out for all the itineraries. You'd have an Excel sheet with like all these different columns and rows, and thereby it's much easier to just engage us. So I think unless Susan or Stephen want to make any other commentary on today's content, it looks like that's most of the Q&As all answered. So unless either of you have anything to say, I'll flash up this last slide that shows our team. So you met Susan and I today. We also have Braden behind the camera, director of operations. He also works with clients when he needs to, but he makes everything move and shake in the background. And then Mark Hellman-Ragubi is the founder, and he's been on prior webinars. He'll pop in on future webinars as well and engage with clients. So if you see Mark or hear from Mark, definitely say hello. But this is our team. We want to definitely again thank Stephen for his time today and in past webinars and all the expertise that he always offers. You can reach out to us to get in touch with him, or you can find him. I don't know if Stephen, you want to mention your contact info, but as well Susan's contact info is in these slides, and we're going to pass out these slides, or we'll send a recording of this webinar to all of our guests today later on. And you guys can definitely share that recording with your friends and others who you think might be considering a Great Lakes cruise. And so with that, you'll hear from us in a little bit. And thanks again so much for your time today.
Take care, all.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good one, everyone.